Hello and welcome to episode 2 of The Driving Force, where we're exploring what really is driving the sustainability agenda in industry. This podcast is brought to you by Tribosonics. Tribosonics is a transformational hard-tech technology business using its unique sensing technologies to create value and drive sustainability for its global industrial customers. And we are your hosts, Christina King, Chief Commercial Officer.
And Mark Wallace, Chief Operating Officer.
Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Vincent Ricco. Vincent is the Innovation Director at Novares Group, an automotive Tier 1 supplier. Vincent's responsible for defining and implementing the technological and sustainability agenda for promoting collaborative projects with strategic partners to support the Beyond Plastic strategy execution. As well as working at the Novares Group, Vincent is also an active career development mentor for young professionals and a business angel supporting the transition from a startup to a scale-up. He is passionate about exploring and learning about very diverse areas, which he believes is a key element to innovation.
Vincent's journey towards sustainability began in the 2000s when he was working in Japan at an automotive OEM and had the chance to work on CO2 reduction strategy and technology roadmaps, where Vincent developed fuel cell vehicles working on hydrogen. Since then, he's explored the pros and cons of CO2 reduction technologies, system architecture approach, and ecosystem development, and has developed a deep understanding of what it means to develop a new product in a circular world. Vincent holds an executive MBA from ESCP Business School with a thesis on using blockchain technology to support track and trace in circular economy, as well as furthering his knowledge by obtaining certificates about sustainability from Cambridge University in sustainability leadership and at ESCP Business School in sustainability business models.
Welcome.
Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
So we've worked together for a while and we're excited about the topics that we're going to be talking through today and hearing about your views and experience. So I suppose to kick off, it'd be really good to explain to the listeners about your role and a little bit about Novares.
So my role is I'm the innovation director at Novares, so a tier 1 automotive supplier for plastic parts. And my role is basically to develop strategies and to develop partnerships and to develop innovations for the automotive market. All of my customers are the automotive OEMs. And so I basically have to work with them upstream to understand what would be their needs and how the market would evolve on one side. But also I have to work on the supplier side to integrate what is necessary to answer to these needs. And the partnerships aims at leveraging competencies that Novares do not have internally in order to do something new indeed. Because it's not by using the old competencies that we can do something new. We need to develop partnerships, and that's the purpose of it.
So new challenges require new solutions. New solutions require new technologies, and to do that, you're bringing through businesses in partnership with yourselves.
Yeah, and even new competencies and new skills. By working with external partners, it's also to leverage new mindsets. Novares is developing some plastic parts, and it's by working, for example, with you as Tribosonics, that we were able to understand how to bring new skills in the team and to develop innovation that we would not have been able to develop alone. And that's really the purpose of the Novacar program, which is the Open Innovation Program, where we aim at scouting new competencies to develop innovations for the market and to answer to the needs that we will not be able to answer otherwise.
For any listeners who don't know what Novacar is, could you tell us in a nutshell, what is Novacar?
Yeah, the Novacar program is an open innovation program where, if I'm trying to frame it, we try to understand how the market would evolve from the big megatrend point of view. Then we are making some ideation workshops in order to define what could be the different applications we would be able to develop. And then either we do it internally as an organic growth development or with partners. And this Novacar program aims at going from the proof of concept stage to the minimal viable product stage, meaning to understand what could be the business model of a solution, and also to promote our innovations to our customers. And the way we are organized is indeed in a very agile way. So we are developing some prototypes, maturing them in terms of business model, and then putting them into real cars in real life in order for them to be able to be promoted globally to our customers around the world.
I think it's a fantastic platform, and it's one that we've really enjoyed engaging with, because you have a route to getting that product out to the market. So really getting engagement from your customers, showing them how it works, making it real, and then getting the pull through the customer. So, we've really enjoyed that, and I think it's a fantastic program. I do talk about it to other companies.
I like also, it's a way to frame or to illustrate a nice quote I like. It's a Chinese proverb. It's show it to me, I can see it. Tell it to me, I can hear it. Involve me and I can understand it. And to promote and to have some prototypes in real life in a program like that, it's really a way to involve our customers in our innovation journey.
The Novacar program is a brilliant example of open innovation. To what extent is that innovation focused on sustainability?
One part of the challenge we are facing, that now the whole ecosystem of automotive is evolving towards developing sustainability. And so we have worked, for example, on different type of solutions, such as the one we have developed together, like the smart tube concept, where we would be able to measure the different pollutants and leaks in a car. But we have also worked on a different raw material, which is requested also for OEMs. And maybe if I'm trying to frame also what is a challenge for car OEMs, it's an automotive market. The automotive market is really in transformation, under transformation now. They are trying to find some ways to stay ahead of competition and to answer to regulations. That's a part of it. And they try to comply to, and at least to measure their CO2 emissions. And so for that, they can work, OEMs, automotive OEMs, can work on three stages: how to evaluate the CO2 emissions while manufacturing the product, how to evaluate the CO2 emissions while using the product, and how to evaluate the impact in the environment at the end of life of the product. So these three parts are life cycle assessment. So to evaluate as upstream as possible the CO2 emissions, and to be able to develop a product which is reducing this impact in the environment. And so the Novacar program, for example, we have different product lines in which we are focusing, for example, on e-powertrain, battery management. We are also working some on technology on new materials in order to reduce both the impact, but also to shift towards a new way of designing products, but as well as pollutant detection or leak detection, which will be to anticipate the regulation evolution, especially in Europe, but not only in Europe, also in California, where it will be requested to know if your car is leaking some pollutant in the atmosphere to prevent a new Dieselgate.
So from everything I think you've mentioned there, e-powertrain, new materials, battery technology, all of that seems to be pointed very much at being more sustainable. Is sustainability driving your innovation, or is your innovation driving sustainability? How do you see it?
Yeah, so I can see this as from a macro point of view, meaning that it's both, I would say. There is no chicken and no egg. At the end, it's evolution. Indeed, I used to say that to be creative, you need a frame to go out of the box. You need a box to go out of the box. And sustainability is a new box, which is a new limitation that we will have to handle. For me, it's a good opportunity to do something new, to do innovation in the future, and to adapt to the change. Because if I'm a bit provocative, innovation is not necessary, but survival is not mandatory. And it means indeed to be able to adapt to the change in the market, you need to do innovation in order to address the market evolution and the market needs.
And to
the market
survive.
and to survive, and to stay in the market, indeed. And as Novares is a commodity supplier, we need to be completely agile on the market change and to really adapt as fast as possible to this market shift, especially nowadays with the requirements from regulations and policies, but also the geopolitical context where the inflation is increasing and where raw material will be more scarce. And that's, I would say, the playground in which we have to work with.
So you have a lot of challenges that are coming from different directions at the minute. How are you addressing that with your customers, and how are you driving that forward?
That's interesting because you cannot do something new with old concepts. And nowadays, in the very short run, car OEMs are, I would say, in a transient phase. They are trying to search how to improve towards sustainability and to comply to regulations. But there is no rule. There is no one recipe. We need to find and to be creative to find solutions for each OEM or each solutions. Indeed, the market trend is really going toward more sustainability because of the CO2 impact. The CO2 emissions is really increasing, and so we need to comply to this. Resilience is really key. Do you know, for example, what is the difference between a linear economy of recycling or a circular economy?
Circular is when it goes back into the production chain. However, I did see a visual about this, that it's a very tiny amount that actually goes back into circulation.
Yeah, indeed, all the product development as of today and from the industrial stage was developed for linear economy, meaning we were extracting resources, we were transforming these resources, and at the end of life, creating some waste. If I try to give some figures, there's 100 gigaton of resources extracted worldwide. A third of it is really used for creating new products. A third of it is creating waste. And 20% of it is CO2 emissions. And only between 8 and 9% of all of these resources are really circular. And that's the challenge we will face in the future. Waste will be the next and the future mine for any new products. That's why, and that's the difference between a linear economy based on recycling, but a circular economy means that there is no waste because everything should be reused, recycled.
I love that term you use, that in the future we're going to be mining waste. That's crazy, but it's, it could happen.
Waste and landfill area will be the future mines.
You talked about compliance, particularly in terms of sustainability. You talked about surviving as a business. And so a business, in order to survive, must meet its regulation, compliance, legislation, whatever the government might put in place. But you're talking about going further than that, going further than compliance. So what would you say to a business that says, well, I'm meeting my regulation, I'm doing everything the government policy says I should do. Why would I do any more than that? That's just going to make me less competitive. What would you say in that scenario?
First, I would say it depends on the time frame. If you are really focused on the very short term, means you do not need to change anything. The only issue is that the long term is made with short terms. And if you add short terms on short terms, then at the end of the day, you haven't changed anything. And that's balance we need to find. It's a balance act, meaning that we need to find a trade-off between what would be the impact in the long term and what kind of action we can do in the short term to be in the right position, in the right direction in the future. Today, we have to comply to two things. Financial report, which is, I would say, business as usual. And financial reports, today, for example, if you do a mistake in your financial report, as president of a company, you can go to jail if you made a mistake. Or, if you made a mistake on purpose.
It's quite serious.
Yeah. But on your ESG report, for example, today, on your carbon footprint communication, if you make a mistake, there is no impact on your, I would say, you do not go to jail. You can have a bad image. So it's more on the goodwill side of it. You can touch the brand, or there is you can make a bad buzz. But part of that, there is not so much an impact on the business.
But this is going to change, isn't it, as we go forward? I think there's going to be more mandatory rules of big corporates to be having to report on that.
I would say I hope so, because today in the industry, we have to comply to scope 1, 2,
Yes.
and 3.
Can you explain what those are first?
So it's so the way to evaluate the CO2 emissions of a company. So the scope 1 is integrating every direct emission that a company is generating. For example, when you are manufacturing, you are generating direct emissions. Then scope 2 is counting the indirect emissions due to your electricity mix. For example, if you are using renewable energy or if you are using nuclear power, you are generating less CO2 than if you are using coal as a primary resources to generate your electricity. And that's scope 2. And scope 3 is everything else, I would say, upstream of your supply chain and downstream of your supply chain. And this is a real exercise of accountability. So I can see that in the future, the sustainability manager of a company will be the chief financial officer, because it's the same competency and you need the same skills to make accountability. But in the industry, you need to the only commitment from regulation you have is to count and to report scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is not mandatory, but it is more and more requested by OEMs and by regulations. At Novares, for example, scope 1, 2, and 3, we have one big part of our impact is that we are using plastic resins, so upstream in the supply. And our OEMs, our customers are requesting us to reduce the CO2 emission of such kind of area, because this is something like around 50% of our controllable emissions. If I can frame what means controllable emissions, so scope 1 is direct emissions from manufacturing, so you can control it, you can measure it. Scope 2 is indirect emissions due to electricity mix, so you can also control it. A simple way to reduce the scope 2 emissions is to buy green certificates to reduce your energy, and that's, I would say, the only way to do it. But on scope 3, you count something like upstream transportation from your supplier to your manufacturing plant. For example, you count the CO2 emissions you have generated by buying your machines to make your manufacturing, for example. And that's upstream. And downstream of your process, you have to count also the packaging, for example, you are using to supply your customers, the downstream transportation, and also the usage of your product, which is a big part of the CO2 emissions. But the usage of the products is what we call the uncontrollable scope 3, because you cannot ask your end user not to use its car to reduce your CO2 emissions.
So the monitoring and measuring of scopes 1, 2, and 3 sounds like as a business you need an entire team dedicated to that.
Yeah, it could be now. There's lots of external companies, even some startups who have been developed in the last decade to address these kind of topics. Now, for example, you can plug in a SaaS platform in your SAP platform, CRP, and automatically you can evaluate your CO2 emissions by just counting what you have bought, what you are doing in the business. And this is accountability, but based on CO2 emissions and not only on the price. It's, I would say, easier now than it was in the past. That's at least to evaluate where you are and how to evaluate the action plan you need to do also.
So it's long-term survivability.
It's long-term survivability, but by managing the really short-term challenge a business is facing, and that's really where the trick is.
And I think if all the large OEMs and the tier one suppliers are driving this change, that will filter down to the other kind of smaller companies that are in the supply chain. It's going to have to happen, and they'll lead the way to do that. But we need to be proactive to support you.
Yeah, and even it will become a barrier of entry. So the good point of it will be a barrier of entry for a newcomer who are not, I would say,
prepared
prepared or who will have an impact. So in the future, we will have to comply, obviously, to this new policy. To be clear, we already have this on stage with some of our customers. For example, some of our customers are requesting their tier one to have 100% of renewable energy by 2025, for example. Some others are requesting, and this is what is tricky, nuclear power in the electricity, and some are not requesting nuclear power or even forbidding to use nuclear power.
So understandably, your business is being more driven by the OEMs than it is by European government policy.
So the European government policy are putting the constraints on
the
OEMs, and then we are, as far as we are
passed
working,
on the supply chain.
Yeah, but to be proactive, it's also to look at how the law and how the regulation will evolve, and to see what kind of development we can do
to keep
ahead, and also to anticipate and to make the right choice in terms of development.
And I suppose as a kind of plastics and polymers business, we should probably ask you how are you going to manage that for the future in terms of what you were talking about, the circular economy and recycled materials. Is there a drive to kind of push that forward? What type of things are you looking at?
Today, recycled material are more expensive because you add energy to recycle what was virgin material. The challenge today is for the automotive OEM to change their specifications. For example, when you are using recycled material, the finish of your part is not all the same for every part. So it's a challenge because obviously you need to have a quality management. I was saying that because it was done and it was put in place 30 years ago, but now they have a quality management process. And so every part should comply to quality requirements. And so there are some criteria to evaluate and to grade the level of the quality for each part. When you are using a recycled material, it's a new game.
Yeah, because it's very inconsistent.
It's less consistent, and even, for example, the industrial designer of an automotive OEM, if it is doing what he was doing before, then you are not able to use recycled material. Some OEMs, for example, have completely inversed the topic and say we will show that the part has been recycled and made with recycled material, so that they have transformed the constraint into an opportunity to show their product has less impact on the environment.
And that's to show the consumer, isn't it, that it's a recycled product and looks like a recycled.
Yeah. And it is very important also to have in mind that recyclability is a part to reduce the CO2 emissions. But you need to work on two sides of it. I would say the rational sustainability. Do you reduce the CO2 emissions when you are developing a part? But also the perceived sustainability. Do you give the impression we are social animals, and so when we are using a product, do we have the feeling to use a part which has a low impact on the environment or a big impact in the environment? And that's a challenge we will face because we are developing plastic components. And even if we are using bioplastics with a very low CO2 emissions or even negative CO2 emissions, the perception of, I would say, a lambda customer would be that they are using just plastic. And that will be one of the challenges, is how to be able to develop a part, so a plastic part, to reduce the CO2, the rational CO2 emissions, but also the perceived CO2 emissions.
So do you think we will ever get to the point of a fully recycled car?
Some OEMs are working on that, and we are trying to support them in this process. But for that, the full ecosystem will have to evolve.
And to support that, because
to support that, and but it's less to use recycled material than to have a clear vision of the full life cycle assessment. For example, today a car, if I make a comparison between an internal combustion engine car and an electric car, an internal combustion engine car, so I would say the weakness of the car is the engine, which is designed to make something like 220,000 kilometers. An electric car, the weakness of it is the battery, but you can change it and shift it. But an electric engine in an electric car has been designed for more than 1 million kilometers. So in a sense, an electric car can last in the market a lot longer than an ICE car. And that would be also a big shift in the market, meaning that the car you are putting in the market today will last for until 2040 or 2050, something like that, which is not the case today for a internal combustion engine car, because the average ICE car in the market will last something like 15 years and then will be landfilled.
So it pushes out this whole recycling issue, doesn't it? If your vehicles on average last 5 years longer, electric vehicles lasting 5, maybe even 10 years longer than the ICE equivalent.
Yeah, but you need to manage the battery, which is the weakness of it. So you'll have to change the battery, something like every 8 to 10 years or so.
And that's a recycling challenge of its own.
Yeah, that's one of the recycling challenge. And on the other side of it, it's every decoration part inside of the car. For example, it's I can use the same image when you are buying a flat. You like to do the painting and you like to do the decoration. When you are using a car which is 30 years old, maybe you will have to do the same thing.
It sounds like we're going to get to a point where we can swap out things in the car. Swap out the seats, swap out they get refurbished.
Well, that's the model
and why not?
with taxis, isn't it? So a taxi structurally is very well built, the chassis, the body, and the internal combustion engine on a taxi is for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But the taxi driver will refurbish the interior every so often, every so many years.
I didn't know that, Mark.
Yeah. So is it possible that a consumer car will take a similar approach?
But for that, it has to be designed for that. Today, one of the challenges is that every OEM are trying for their specification to evolve, but this has not been taken into account yet. For example, the quality management is still the same. To give you another example, when we are designing a plastic part with 3 types of plastic, at the end of life of this, it is very difficult to recycle these parts because it has not been designed to be recyclable. It has not been designed to be separable at the end, and it has not been designed to be compatible with recycling channels. It is changing, it is evolving. But it will be a challenge because obviously by designing this part, it was not by pleasure, it was because of cost efficiency. So, and then that's something we have to do, either to make parts repairable and recyclable, or to make parts less costful and less recyclable.
What other sustainability challenges do you foresee in the automotive industry? What's on the horizon in terms of the next challenge?
One of the challenge is automotive industry is really facing some key transformation process really deep inside. If I make a small joke, it's in the 1970s, a TV was costing around 5,000 francs, and in a car was costing the same amount in the 70s. If you are going up to the year 2010, the car price was following the inflation rate. And today, a TV is around 700 euro, which is 5,000 francs. So, meaning that the cost of your TV stayed the same. So it was the improvements was the same as the inflation rate. But the car followed this slope up to the mid of the year 2010 and so. Then regulation for safety arrived. And then the price of your car was slightly increasing compared to the evolution of the inflation. Then CO2 emissions regulations increased also. And now we are at a point where the challenge of automotive industry is not to cannibalize their buyers and customers, because for me, one of the key elements, it will be a social element for people to be able to afford to buy a new car. So for me, I can see either 2 scenarios. Either we continue business as usual to be able to have to buy some cars, or to switch to a mobility service environment where everybody would lease a car.
So the service model.
And the service model, it could solve some issues. If I can make another image, for example, if you consider a copy machine, maybe you know that.
They were one of the first, I think, to do
And
it.
so a copy machine, if you build it as a product, it is built to last 3 years. And the business model is made on paper and ink. And after 3 years, unfortunately, because engineers made their job well, the copy machine is worked out, and you need to replace it. And the full ecosystem, when you sell a copy machine as a product, is built on that. The business developer is selling a copy machine, is rewarded on selling a copy machine, is rewarded to renew the copy machine, and to make a business on paper and ink. If you consider the same machine, the same copy machine as a service, and if you sell your copy machine, if your business model is to make the business on per page, that's what it is today. Obviously, the topic is absolutely not the same. You need to build your copy machine to last as long as possible, to be as efficient as possible in the paper and in ink, because this is on you. If there is a maintenance
You're bearing the cost, aren't you?
and the cost is on the repairing. So today, automotive industry is not built that way yet. We are still building products, not building services. We have to be more sustainable in the future. We will have to think more as a service more than as a product.
The analogy of the copy machine requires maintenance, and that is a cost associated with it, just like a car requires maintenance. So in this new economy, is maintenance still a big issue for an electric vehicle compared to an internal combustion engine?
Yeah, in terms of ecosystem, it's also a big shift in the market. For an ICE car, almost everybody were able to manage the maintenance of their car. Today, it's not the case anymore. There is also, for example, already some car OEMs which are forbidding people to touch the car from the inside because of safety, obviously, because when you have a 400 volt battery and DC-DC and everything inside of the front hood, then there is potentially a safety issue. And some OEMs have made the decision to forbid, and you are not able, as a user, to open your car and to look inside of it. And so it is moving towards a service, meaning that the only people able to make the maintenance of your car is the OEM or the partner of the OEM. And this is, for me, a first step. The only issue is today it's still a product that you buy, and it is a separated business model. So there is on one side people who are selling the cars, and on the other side people are doing the maintenance of the car.
But it needs to change the structure in the market, because at the minute it's too expensive. You can rent, you can do rental models, but they don't compare to actually owning your own car. It's cheaper to own your own car. So this is a big element until that changes. Yeah. But the whole industry needs to kind of work together to create this new model.
Yeah, you cannot change things from one day to another. It's like if in France we were changing the side of the road to be like in UK. But this week we will start with trucks, and if it is working, next week we will do it with cars. Unfortunately, it doesn't work.
No.
So how many years are we away from genuine transition from selling cars as a product to selling cars as a service?
For me, it would be a big transition. So it's if it is happening, it would take something like 15 to 20 years. If it is happening, one of the headwind we would face is the scarcity of resources, which can accelerate such kind of process. Starting with saying that indeed, for me, the big issue will be, or the big challenge will be the social impact and the affordability of a mobility service. I can make the comparison between Paris and London, for example. When I buy my tube ticket in London, it's just crazy for me. It's
crazy expensive.
Crazy expensive. Yeah. It's 5 times the cost of a subway ticket. In France, there is an incentive from the state. My understanding is that in UK it's private, fully private, almost fully private, and so that's also a different model. For me, there is a big impact also on how, and in the future, how the states will be implied and will be
incentivized, I suppose, by the government is a good point. Yeah, if you reduce the price of public transport, then people will take it.
Yeah, and it will be the same also for electricity supply. If it is fully private or if it is considered as a service for people, then it's a different way to evaluate and to make the pricing of it. And so to answer your question, if what could be a time frame, indeed, something like 15 to 20 years. And why I say that, it's because when you are developing a platform in automotive, you are developing it for 15 years, which is 2 times the lifetime of a car. And most of the time you do a second stage of it. So your vision when you are building a new plant is 30 years. And so everything we do today will last for the next 30 years. And so that's why it's a long run.
Slow to change.
It's really slow to change. But in terms of architecture, every decision we take today could have an impact in 30 years from now. Indeed, by short-term decisions today, will impact long-term impact, indeed, long-term efficiency.
Are there key innovations that you think the industry needs in order to move on this 15, 20, 30-year journey towards selling as a service?
For me, there is different topics. One will be the energy supply, which is at the bottom of everything. And that's why when we are doing the reporting of Scope 1 and Scope 2, indeed, the Scope 2 emissions is to be able to use as renewable energy as possible. And this is a basement of everything.
And if there's not enough renewable energy providers, that's going to be a problem.
But it's creating a demand. The demand is creating an offer and vice versa. So it's the point is by pushing the company to report on their Scope 2 emissions and to reduce their Scope 2 emissions, it is creating demand in the market. Then the offer is coming. And then that's at least the assumption behind. The challenge we will face is that we will not be able to replace oil because our industry is addicted to oil. Every infrastructure we have built for the last 200 years was built on oil availability. So to switch from this industry and this infrastructure to something new will take some time. We need to first to look at how to be less dependent from oil and also to address the social impact because oil, even if we are thinking that it is expensive today, a liter of oil is something like 7 kilowatt hour of energy. Which is the equivalent of something like between 10 and 20 men of workforce. So it's huge. It's very dense, very easy to travel, very safe in a way. So there's lots of benefits by using oil, and that's why we were using it.
That's why we're so dependent.
That's why, yes. For me, the key element is how we will be able to be less dependent from oil. And even less dependent from fossil energy and fossil fuels. But it will be a tricky situation. That's why it will not take only 1 year or 10 years. It will take more than that, for sure.
So policy is driving a move towards sustainable energy. That's creating demand. Demand should be creating supply, but that supply is not meeting demand soon enough.
Yeah, so that's why my guess is in the near future, we will face, for sure, inflation because the demand will create this inflation because the offer is not, obviously, to put some new infrastructure takes some time, and volatility, meaning that you will have some offer and demand equilibrium. The demand will create the offer will take some time to arrive in the market, and so on and so forth. And in a context where we will have some raw material scarcity, and especially in Europe, including UK.
While we're talking about the challenges around energy infrastructure, can I ask you about hydrogen? Because it's an area that really interests me. I haven't seen, we've been in Paris most of this week. I haven't seen much in terms of hydrogen infrastructure here, and we don't have much in terms of the UK infrastructure. Germany seems to be ahead. Where do you see that going, particularly in your own context in France?
Yeah. So in France, there is lots of investment on hydrogen field. Very good reasons. There's lots of competencies to be able developed, and not only in France but also in Europe. The point is how to direct the right investment on the right field. For example, it doesn't make some sense to use hydrogen for light mobility, like in a car. The big reason is that we are limited today with a raw material supply, which is platinum. And if you take today, for example, if you take all the platinum supply in the world, if you 50% of it is used in industry. So let's consider that we don't touch it. Then there is 25% of platinum which is used for jewelry. So we're not stopping marrying from one day to the other. So let's not touch it. Okay. So we still have 25% of platinum used today for automotive industry for catalysis in the car. So let's consider that from one day to the other, we will stop using diesel cars and use this 25% of platinum supply available to make fuel cell cars. With this level of platinum, we are only able to build per year 1.5 million cars. It means 1.5% of the total mix of cars in the world. So it's not answering to the needs, for sure.
So it's not only by any stretch an infrastructure problem in terms of providing hydrogen infrastructure. It's equally a problem around technology in the vehicles themselves, yeah, which comes back down to material resource.
Yeah, material resource, but also it's because today, as far as there is no prioritization of actions, from my point of view, where it makes sense is for heavy industry. But to use H2, which is a green H2 or blue H2, so meaning the hydrogen which has been built with renewable energy. And that makes sense because you really be able to decarbonize heavy industry. What makes sense also is for heavy transportation, for trucks and bus, which is making sense because battery electric trucks is very difficult to build because you bring more batteries than merchandise, and so that's a trade-off. And so for the other point is where it is making sense is for a B2B process. So like commercial vehicle, for example, are using fuel cells. Trucks are able to use fuel cells. Bus can use fuel cell because they can manage the full scope of it, including maintenance and including safety, because it's a gas which is going up. And so you need to, when you do the maintenance of your truck, bus, or light commercial vehicle, you need to manage also the safety of this gas, which could leak, which could go up also in the maintenance area. And so you need to put some regulation like ATEX level environment, and it is costful, and so on and so forth. So it's the point is. It really makes sense for some activities like trucks, bus, for sure, trains maybe.
But not quite yet for commercial vehicles.
And for commercial vehicles, you will see them. For sure, we will have some. They will be still very expensive.
Maybe that's what's going to happen in the future. It won't be one way or two ways. Yeah, there'll be 10 ways.
It's like a bouquet. Yeah, it's like different areas. But the impact of when using a bouquet, it means that each solution has to use different financial investments. So it means that all of this application will be more costful, more expensive.
Because you end up with this mixed industry of hydrogen for the 1.5% of vehicles that are going to take the platinum.
Yeah.
And
maybe that'll be for the sports cars.
Do you think so?
Yes.
Yes. I noticed it was you who suggested that, Christina. And you've got the electrified infrastructure for the rest, but there will still be ICEs on the road for years to come. So you've got three infrastructures at least running in parallel for decades to come.
Yeah, and also for me it's interesting to look at what we will be able to change, but technology will not do everything. It will be a part of it. Innovation will be still a part to be able to adapt to the evolution in the market. and at the end of the day also to work on social acceptance. For when an electric vehicle has something like 400 miles or 300 miles of range, and compared to an ICE car, which is able to make 1,200 kilometers without stopping to the station. It has to be accepted.
So, Vincent, Tribosonics have been in Paris this week, which is quite a frequent occurrence for us as a business. We love it here. We've got some great partners in the city. You don't have to spend long in France, or particularly in Paris, spending time in the tech scene to hear the phrase La French Tech. Can you tell me what La French Tech is?
It's a good question. It has been created something like 7 years ago, I guess. It's a political push to create innovation, and something like 20 or 30,000 of startups have been created. So it's really huge. As of today, I would say there is a pro and cons. The pro part of it is that it has created a very good movement, because entrepreneurship, French culture is not a culture where you take risk. And this has created a big move, because entrepreneurship is taking risk. So obviously, by making failures, you can learn and can build something new. That's, for me, I would say, the good part of it. The drawback of it is that it is needing a lot of capital investment. And so there was a kind of bubble created for the last 5 to 7 years, and valuation of startups could become crazy. Now it is slowing down a bit. The capital investment is a bit decreasing. For me, which is good, which is a good sign, because it means that it is the market of capital investment is consolidating. And now the investment on startups is going more on more tangible projects than project which has some potential in the future. They are looking more now on rational, what would be the value for tomorrow, and what would be the impact in the market. And sustainability is a part of the topic. Now, to invest in a company which has an impact, a startup, for example, makes a lot of sense for lots of investors. I'm also a business angel on the side. So I'm also following this ecosystem from not from far away, but from really
An
from
investor
inside out.
point of view.
Yeah. And also a mentor of startups. And the point is, I can see that from 5 years ago to now, the whole process has been now professionalized. Before it was more on the, okay, I have an idea, I have a slide, let's do it. Now it's really professionalized, and that's for me the maturity of the ecosystem has really been improved for the last couple of years.
I want to, quickly ask, is La French Tech now kind of operating by itself and the market is pushing that forward, or is there still investment being put into the French Tech?
There's a lot of what I saw for the last 2 to 3 years, that family office are now really structuring themselves to invest in startups. There's even some capital investment family office which are investing and to play the statistics, for example. On my side, for example, I'm more on the mentoring side, because when you are working with the startups, they are searching not only for money, but they are searching also for competency, skills, insights, and strategy and network. And for me, it's not only to bring money, it's also to bring knowledge and to open some doors. But it's indeed also something which is a key element for the startups to become a scale-up. Otherwise, they will go in the dev valley between the two.
So let me just make sure I've understood correctly, and please correct me if I haven't. So La French Tech is a government-led initiative, which over the past 7 years has achieved really a shift in cultural mindset across the nation. And now 7 years in, we're starting to see it maturing, consolidating, and becoming somewhat independent of government. But all that has been achieved with significant government investment initially, now being backfilled by the family offices and I guess VCs and private equity funds. Not without its challenges, as you've described, and we need to see those startups moving into the scale-up phase and beyond. Is that correct? Everything I've understood?
Yeah. And what is when I mean consolidating is when we are looking at on the pre-seed and seed era. For example, the consolidation has not arrived there yet because there is kind of delay, something like 6 to 8 months to that stage. Investment and family office now are investing to B series, C series, and so. But indeed, the state supported that. BPI, which is a bank which has been created in 2008 or 9 to support automotive industry at those time, has then had some cash to invest, and that's how they have been created. And it is an interesting story because it was created to save the automotive industry, to make the link with what we've said today.
Yeah.
And now they are investors and supporting the whole startup ecosystem.
Can I ask you one last question on a subject that's quite close to your heart? In fact, two subjects that are very close to your heart, that's innovation and sustainability. To what extent is or are innovation and sustainability synonymous with La French Tech?
Innovation is more innovation than sustainability, because the way it has been built on the Schumpeterian mindset, meaning that by creating new companies, you will create new competition and you will adapt to new needs in the market. And that's really what is driving this ecosystem. Sustainability is a part of it. And first, it is led by European law. It is not led by national law. And second, it is necessary to work on them. So it's more on the regulation side, which is becoming an opportunity to develop something new, than on the innovation side, which is still we are continuing to see startups innovating on lots of things which are not sustainable. It's unfortunate, but it's a part of the game.
That's really interesting. It's like the sustainability hasn't become kind of the really important thing. It's starting to get there, and it's going to move there from policy and realization from society that will drive that, but we're not quite there yet.
After, it's a question of mindset, awareness also in the population. I know that in youngsters, not all of them are quite more aware now than what in my generation we were. But after, it's also a question of what kind of world they will have to face in the future. And that's I saw lots of anxiety in this kind of generation, the youngsters less than 25 years old, for example. But that's also, these guys are developing startups. And so the good point is I can see, for example, startup starting from scratch, doing a new venture, starting to be in the DNA of their company, to be B Corp or to be compliant with sustainability requirements, for example. But to work also on the social side of it, to work on the CO2 side of it. And that's, for me, some good insight for the future. It's, for me, what could be a part of the Schumpeterian new way of developing value in the market, because all companies are obviously stuck in their past investment. And that's something which is really a challenge, not to be in the Kodak syndrome. Kodak died not because they were doing the wrong business. It's they died because they were wrong about what they were really selling. They were not selling paper and picture. They were selling memories. That was their business. They died because they didn't handle the right strategy purpose. But it is easier to say it now because obviously they were protecting their investment. And it is the same for big corporations. Big corporations have assets and have investments that they have to value and to use and to value. And that's really a tricky situation now, because we need to shift fast to something new. And obviously some are reacting with less flexibility, I would say, than what a startup could do. So that's why the good sign is the ecosystem in La French Tech is also pushing forward, developing new activities, also both to challenge big corporations or to take their business in the future.
It sounds like an optimistic future from what you're seeing coming through, which is positive. Yeah. So, Vincent, are there any key points you want the audience to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
What I can say, I can use an image, another one,
Do it.
of the Red Queen from Lewis Carroll, the
Yes,
author.
the famous author.
Yeah, and see, if I try to frame what I like, one passage is, if I can quote it. So it's is speaking about a slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. And for me, it was when Lewis Carroll was working on this book. He was his insight was Darwin. If you stay at the same place, you are regressing. You are not going forward. I liked this quote because it's really framing what we have in the economy today. We are trying to run twice as fast to stay at the same place. But sometimes it's a lot better to stop, to look at things, and to take the right decision to be able to frame it and to understand what is at stake, and to bounce on what we said all along the discussion. Sometimes the long-term impact is made by short-term decisions. But for this, we need to identify what will be the impact in the future to take the right decisions today. And that, for me, which is what really is at stake today. How to take the right decision in the short term to stay in the competition, but also to keep on track, to stay alive as a company in the future.
That's great insight, Vincent. Thank you for that. It sounds quite strategic. Take a moment to think about how we're going to move forward. What is the roadmap? And take into all account the considerations that impact.
And to think in terms of ecosystem, not only as only a part of the equation, but also to have the full scope of the understanding.
Check out the show notes for more information and links to the topics of discussion today, and on the Novares Group and Tribosonics. This episode of The Driving Force was brought to you by Tribosonics and sponsored by RaiseLab. RaiseLab connects large enterprises and startups to create lasting and measurable value together through tangible projects developed at scale. RaiseLab has a fantastic podcast studio. We're in it, in the heart of Paris, which is where we had the pleasure of recording the episode. To find out more, visit www.raiselab.co.
Well, Vincent, thank you so much for being with us today. You've taken us on a journey through the automotive industry, starting off with open innovation and sustainability. We talked about this chicken and egg of, is innovation driving sustainability, or is sustainability driving innovation? And clearly everything you're doing in that area is linked. So fascinating. We talked about government policy, particularly in Europe, being driven through the OEMs, through the tier ones in your industry. And we've talked about the pressure on energy. Again, policy driving demand, driving supply, particularly in renewable energy, but that supply not being able to keep up, leading, of course, to the energy crisis that we're seeing on the horizon. And we talked about within the automotive industry, this mix of energies as we see hydrogen picking up pace slowly, electrification picking up pace more slowly, but oil and gas very much here for many years to come. And lastly, we've been talking about material resources, particularly in terms of electrification, battery technology, and hydrogen technology, and the subject of platinum fuel cells. So thank you for fascinating insights into this world. And I'm sure our listeners will be intrigued to hear everything we've covered today. So from Christina and I, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was great. I was very happy to be here with you today.
Our next episode will welcome special guest Dr. Michelle Lynch, founder and CEO of Enabled Future Limited, and we'll be discussing key topics in that sector, including car battery manufacturing, whether carbon neutrality really helps us to become more sustainable, and what is the circular economy. Until then, thank you for listening.